Well, good morning everyone, and a very warm welcome on this miserable, wet morning to the Changing Media Summit 2018. It seems incredible that it was only a year ago that I was stood up in a room very similar to this last year, introducing the last Changing Media Summit, because what a year it has been. When I stood up here last time and kicked off, I started with a video that ended with this guy declaring war on the media. Do you remember that? It was absolutely chilling. It sent chills down my spine. And I think for many people, it's the arrival of this guy on the scene and that sort of video that made people appreciate just how important media was in the world, once again, to hold people like him to account and uncover the truth. I also held up a slide from the Edelman Trust Barometer that showed in 2017 we were in a crisis of trust. Trust, we had been arguing for quite some time, was an increasingly rare and precious commodity in the fractured digital landscape. Against a backdrop of Brexit and Trump and a thoroughly unpredictable year, trust in all areas, it said, had fallen. Public trust in government, in major institutions and in the media had plummeted. I also talked a lot about how the existing paradigm that we were seeing within the digital advertising space of constantly chasing eyeballs at lowest cost at scale, regardless of context, was going to potentially change the nature and makeup of the web that we know forever. And I'm not going to lie, I felt really guilty standing up in front of all of you lot at the beginning of this incredibly auspicious event with such a negative message. But the reality is, it's what was happening. We had to face into it. So a year on, what's changed? Where are we now? And are we in fact in a better place? Well, look, it feels pretty good actually standing up here this year, a year later, and saying that I do feel that progress is being made. You know, it does feel that the message of quality and trust are beginning to land and it's getting through. When we look at the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2018, it says that we've now moved from a crisis of trust to a battle for truth. Now look, is that better? Potentially it is. We hope it is. When we look at what's happening, if we look at trust in media this year, it actually suggests that trust in media as a whole has stayed flat. But that trust in media includes both journalistic content, but also social media platforms. If we go a little bit deeper, we can see that a massive divergence is happening between trust in social media platforms and trust in journalism. And in actual fact, what's wonderful to see here is that trust in journalism is the highest it's been for the last 6 years. What a wonderful difference a year can make. Now look, it's gratifying to see all of this cold, hard data and see it as a wider trend. But at The Guardian, we've seen this ourselves with our own evidence. The fact that people have been increasingly coming back to The Guardian to consume our content. And the fact that we've had enormous success in our reader revenue strategy that has got us over 800,000 people now contributing financially to the well-being and the future of The Guardian. We've also continued full force with our journalistic mission, as outlined in Kath Finer, our editor-in-chief's essay in November on the subject, and landed a string of journalistic coups over the year that have really helped our readers make sense of this often chaotic world. Things like the Paradise Papers, or the Two Sisters chicken scandal, or Danny Taylor's incredible investigation into child abuse in football clubs. Trusted journalism has always been at our core, and in the last couple of years, as we've navigated our way through this tumultuous news agenda and pursued our third revenue pillar of reader relationships, we found that people are prepared to dig into their pockets and pay us for this. And critics, some well-meaning, some perhaps not so, told us that no one would ever pay for something that they could get for free. Well, look, I'm really pleased to be able to say here that we are proving them wrong. And it does feel, therefore, that something has changed, or maybe that something's actually correcting itself, that the return to quality and trust is actually happening. And we can see this from the advertising perspective as well. It is beginning to happen. Now, I'm not saying we're there yet, but things are definitely seeming like they're going back on a more sensible path. So why did this happen? You know, what caused this change? Well, look, from an advertiser perspective, it's clear that there were three things that happened last year. The first one is the now very famous Mark Pritchard speech in the IAB in the US, which I'm not going to go into, of course, but it clearly set the cat amongst the digital pigeons last year. The second thing was the Times investigation into what essentially blew the lid off brand safety and made us all think differently about that. And the final one was our own investigation into the digital supply chain, where we bought our own inventory and discovered that from time to time we were only receiving 30p in every pound. We knew that had huge reverberations around the world, around where the money was actually going in the digital supply chain. Now look, any one of these things could have been enough to set the pulse racing of anyone who cared about digital advertising. But all coming together, it made it feel like for the first time we actually had a decent look at where ads were landing and where the money was actually going. And what we discovered was it was a bit of a mess. And the scale of the challenge shook up the industry and the world, it feels, over the last year. But it does feel that things have started to change as a result of this. The more I talk to people, the more it feels like we're returning to a simpler paradigm, or more like, not a simpler paradigm, but just the paradigm of advertising the way it always was. Now, it's still powered by technology. The difference is that technology is not the master, or it's becoming less of the master, it feels. Like this is the paradigm that has existed for many, many years with regards to advertising. Is that quality adverts placed against quality media that generates a trusted environment and an engaged audience that then gives back to the advertiser brand effectiveness and ultimately sales is a paradigm we've always well understood that over the years seems to have been less and less important, seems to have been completely forgotten about as we chased low-cost audiences at scale across the internet. But it certainly feels, the more I talk to people and the more I see from our own revenue streams, that this is beginning to slowly return. I'm not going to say that technology is going to disappear, far from it. I want to embrace technology, but I want it to become a servant to this paradigm, and it feels like that's what's beginning to happen. And it feels like it's beginning to happen because people are beginning to see the evidence that this actually works. I mean, there are so many examples of this. This is one of my favorites. This is a study that was done by AOP and Newsworks that worked with a bunch of neuroscientists last year. Now, look, I'm no scientist, so I can't go into the detail of it. But what I will say is that they found time and time again that premium editorial context creates stronger engagement, higher emotional intensity, and long-term memory encoding, which is proven to correlate with decision-making and sales. I mean, look at this. You can see this from the impact that they have. Ads on premium sites, as opposed to long tail, are viewed 70% longer. They create 29% higher engagement, and when seen in this premium context, also elicit stronger and more positive emotional response. I mean, this is just one of many, many proof points that people are now uncovering and looking for that helps us revert back to that simpler, more basic paradigm. But like I said, we're still working things out. And there's still quite a long way to go in recognizing what we need to do. But it seems clear to me, and to most of the people that I talk to, that trust and quality started to make a comeback in 2017. And I believe we're just at the beginning of this. Now look, the theme of this event, as we just heard, is responsibility. And every one of us here is responsible, I believe, to make sure that this continues, to make sure that trust and quality still wins out. So look, thank you all so much for coming. We have an amazing program ahead of us. It's going to be fascinating and informative, and we're going to dig into all of these and other topics as we go along. But for now, let me hand over to journalist, filmmaker, and writer, Paul Mason. Thank you, and enjoy the day.